Have you ever stopped to truly consider how the words we use every single day are, well, they're kind of like tiny linguistic time capsules?
hmm
They're absolutely packed with incredible stories, hiding histories, forgotten customs, and really surprising shifts in meaning right there in plain sight.
Yeah, it's like our everyday language is this vast, bustling museum of human experience, just, waiting for us to explore its most unexpected exhibits.
Exactly. Welcome, everyone, to a fascinating linguistic journey here on the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a captivating plunge into the G's. That's right, we're unpacking the often unexpected and utterly captivating origins of words that start with the letter G.
And we've gathered, well, a really rich collection of word histories. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to pull back the curtain on these G words, extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight for you.
We'll uncover surprising facts and connect the dots between sometimes distant historical events, forgotten cultural practices, and the very words you might use every day.
Yeah, our goal is to ensure you emerge from this deep dive feeling genuinely well-informed, but, without feeling overwhelmed by just a mountain of information.
Think of it as a shortcut to becoming maybe a linguistic connoisseur, ready to share these truly wild tales.
That's right. We're not just going to tell you what these words used to mean, but hopefully why their meanings changed and what that tells us about ourselves, our history, and the incredible flexibility of human language.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Get ready for some truly wild rides through language, because these G words, they really have some stories to tell.
Definitely.
We're going to kick things off by exploring what we call the transformative power of language. You see, words aren't static. They're much more like living organisms.
Oh, absolutely. They evolve, they mutate, and sometimes they undergo truly dramatic transformations, taking on meanings that are wildly far removed from their original sense.
Right. So this first section is dedicated to some of the most striking semantic shifts among our G words. And I think these next ones might genuinely surprise you.
It's really remarkable how often a word's journey from one meaning to a completely different one mirrors profound shifts in societal values, maybe technological advancements or even just, popular imagination.
Hmm.
It's almost as if language adapts and reinvents itself to stay relevant to the human experience.
And there's probably no better example of this than our first word, glamour. Today, it instantly evokes images of, I don't know, Hollywood stars, dazzling lights, incredible beauty, a certain kind of alluring mystique.
Right. But would you believe it originated in Scots in the early 18th century, and it meant enchantment or magic? Literal magic.
Wow, literal magic. So not just metaphorical magic, but actual spells and enchantment.
Well, yeah, and the true surprise here, the real kicker, is that glamour is actually an alteration of the word grammar.
Grammar. How on earth does grammar connect to magic? When we think of grammar today, it's, well, rules for sentences, maybe a bit of a dry academic subject.
Exactly. But back in the Middle Ages, grammar was a much broader term. It could mean scholarship or learning in a very general sense, and this often included things that bordered on the occult or, let's say, mysterious practices.
Oh.
You have to consider this. For a largely illiterate population back then, the ability to read and write, to decipher ancient texts, or even to do complex calculations was often associated with a kind of mysterious, almost magical knowledge.
I see. So the connection highlights a time when deep learning itself was seen as bordering on the supernatural, like a form of power.
Precisely. It was a kind of spelling in the truest, most enchanting sense of the word. Casting a spell versus spelling a word.
That's incredible to think about. So from occult scholarship and ancient incantations to, well, Hollywood glamour, how does a word make that leap? From dusty academic texts to dazzling lights and celebrity, what broader cultural shifts were happening, especially by the 1930s, that made glamour such a perfect fit for this new kind of modern allure?
That's a fantastic question, and it really speaks to the power of, let's call it, cultural rebranding. The mid-19th century saw an initial shift, moving towards magical beauty, like an intangible charm.
Okay.
But by the 1930s, in U.S. English, you had the advent of mass media, cinema, the burgeoning star system. Society was really ready for a new form of enchantment.
Ah, different kind of magic.
Exactly. It was no longer about arcane, hidden knowledge, but about manufactured mystique, aspiration, and the allure projected from the silver screen. The word glamour was perfectly primed, you could say, to be reappropriated for this new, visible form of magic. It connected to our innate desire for something captivating and, well, larger than life.
So it speaks to how our perception of magic itself evolved from hidden wisdom to public spectacle.
It truly does. It's a testament to how the perceived magic of knowledge transformed into the perceived magic of lore and charm, driven by new forms of media and entertainment. It followed the culture.
All right, let's dive into another one that will absolutely blow your mind. Geek.
Oh, this is a good one.
Right. When you hear geek today, you probably think of an obsessive enthusiast, someone deeply knowledgeable about a niche subject, often associated with computers, science fiction, gaming. It can even be a badge of honor now.
Totally. But that's not where it started. Not even close.
Okay, tell us.
You're right. Geek is a late 19th century U.S. slang word. Its etymological journey starts with the English dialect word geck, which meant fool.
A fool.
Yep, a fool. This word geck has a Germanic source and is related to the Dutch word gek, which also means mad or silly. But the truly surprising part, and honestly one of the most vivid examples from our sources, comes from Webster's New International Dictionary of 1954.
Okay, what did Webster say?
Its definition for geek was a carnival wild man whose act usually includes biting off the head off a live chicken or snake.
Wait, what? Biting the head off a live chicken or snake?
That's what it says.
I mean, talk about a dramatic shift. That paints a very, very different picture. So from a literal carnival performer, someone on the absolute fringes performing for shock value,
Yeah, quite disturbing, really.
to an unfashionable person, and then all the way to our modern obsessive enthusiast, what, in your view, does that incredible evolution reveal about how societal perceptions of outsiders or intensely focused interests have shifted over time? What happened in our culture to enable that reappropriation?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because it mirrors how society reevaluates what's considered normal or even valuable. Initially, the carnival geek, was almost a funnel of pity or maybe disgust, performing purely for shock value. It's a whole outcast.
Right.
The term then broadened a bit to describe anyone perceived as socially awkward, eccentric, or unfashionable, kind of a general term for an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as specialized knowledge, particularly in areas like technology, science, complex hobbies, became incredibly powerful and, frankly, desirable in the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
Ah, the rise of tech culture.
Exactly. The very traits that once made someone an outsider, that deep focus, the intense passion, often a lack of concern for mainstream social conventions, these became assets. Highly valued assets.
So the term itself underwent this radical reappropriation.
Completely. Transforming from a label of derision to one of identity and even pride. It's a fantastic illustration of how communities can reclaim and redefine labels that were once used against them.
Absolutely. From biting heads off chickens to coding the next big app, that's quite a transformation for the ages.
It really is.
Now, speaking of how culture can completely reinvent a word, few have seen a journey as profound or as, well, socially charged as gay.
Yes, this word has a complex history. It's recorded back in Middle English, where its original meaning was quite straightforward. Lighthearted and carefree.
Lighthearted and carefree.
Yes, it came from Old French gay, though its ultimate origin before that remains unknown. Its semantic drift, the shift in meaning, began as it developed the notion of being addicted to social pleasures.
Okay, like a party animal.
Sort of, yeah, often carrying an association of loose morality or recklessness. We see this in historical phrases like gay dog or gay Lothario. Lothario being a character from Rowe's 1703 play The Fair Penitent, which referred to men who lead a life of pleasure, sometimes implying promiscuity.
Interesting. And the source also mentioned another darker slang meaning.
It did.
Okay.
Our source also notes its extension in slang used to refer to a woman living by prostitution, particularly noted in the Victorian era. So it had these quite varied, sometimes negative connotations related to pleasure-seeking and morality.
And then the modern usage, which is arguably its most dominant meaning today.
Right. The meaning homosexual appears in examples from the 1930s as an adjective. The source notes the earliest citation found is actually prison slang.
Prison slang.
Wow. And the use of gay as a noun for individuals appears later from the 1970s, which coincides with the rise of the modern LGBTQ plus rights movement.
Which is a powerful example of a word taking on a completely new, and for many, its primary meaning.
It is, and it's important to remember as we discuss this, that we are simply reporting the historical evolution of the word as presented in the source material. We're not endorsing any viewpoints, just tracing the linguistic path.
Of course, just looking at the history.
This journey illustrates how language changes, reflecting profound shifts in society and how specific groups identify or are identified. The transformation from carefree to a term for a specific sexual orientation is a profound linguistic and cultural shift.
Mm-hmm.
It highlights the dynamic nature of language, how it adapts to describe new social realities, and, crucially, the self-identification of communities. This process of reappropriation and semantic evolution is a consistent theme we see in the history of many words.
It truly is. This word's journey really makes you think about how language can reflect and sometimes shape social perception, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Its path is a powerful example of how meanings can be completely recontextualized over time, often driven by cultural shifts and social movements, demonstrating language's fluidity and responsiveness to human experience.
Well said.
Next up, let's talk about gossip. Today, gossip is, well, it's all about idle chatter, often rumors about other people's personal lives, right?
Yeah, usually seen negatively.
But its origin is so surprisingly different almost. Sacred.
Indeed. The roots of gossip go way back to late Old English godsib, and it literally meant godfather or godmother, a baptismal sponsor.
A godsib, like a sibling in God.
Exactly. It was a person related to one in God, derived from God, and sib, which meant a relative or kinsman. These were individuals brought together by a spiritual, familial bond, people who would naturally be privy to intimate family information.
Okay, so a sacred familial bond transformed into idle chatter. How did that happen? What's the thread connecting a baptismal sponsor to whispered rumors?
Well, what's fascinating here is precisely that journey. In Middle English, the sense shifted slightly to a close friend, or maybe more specifically, a person with whom one shares intimate talk. Think of a trusted confidant.
Okay, that makes sense. Your godparent might be a close friend.
Right. From there, it evolved to refer to a person who engages in such talk, a talebearer. And then finally, in the early 19th century, it shifted again to mean the idle talk itself. The verb, meaning to engage in idle talk, actually dates from a bit earlier, the early 17th century.
Ah,
It suggests that these trusted confidants, those connected by divine ties, were naturally the ones privy to and associated with the sharing of intimate information. And then that association narrowed over time to casual, often informal, or even sensational talk about others.
so the trusted relationship became the conduit for informal information, which then became the term for the information itself, gradually losing its positive, sacred connotation.
Precisely. The sacred connection faded, and the casual talk remained.
That makes so much sense, yet it's still wild to think about. From holy relatives gathered at a christening to, neighborhood busybodies exchanging whispered secrets.
Language evolution in action.
Speaking of wild, let's get to a word that's a pure literary invention. Galumph.
Lewis Carroll.
Yes. Galumph, now commonly understood to mean move in a clumsy and ponderous way, was, as you said, coined in 1872 by the brilliant Lewis Carroll in his fantastical poem Jabberwocky from Through the Looking Glass.
And the source suggests it may be a delightful blend of gallop and triumph.
So it started with the idea of prancing in triumph and then shifted to move in a clumsy and ponderous way. That's almost comical, a semantic inversion.
It is rather ironic, isn't it?
It's a perfect example of a specific literary coinage entering the general lexicon and then undergoing this subsequent, rather ironic, change in its core meaning. It shows language isn't just about ancient roots, it's also about creative invention and the unpredictable paths words take once they're unleashed into common use.
It certainly does. Carroll crafted Jabberwocky to be both, terrifying and absurd, and galumph kind of encapsulates that perfectly. Perhaps the inherent absurdity of the word itself, its slightly awkward sound.
Yeah, it sounds a bit clumsy.
Right. That sound, combined with the context of the Jabberwocky Monsters movements, maybe caused its modern, clumsier meaning to prevail, overwriting its initial triumphant component.
So the sound influenced the meaning over time.
It's a great illustration of how a word's phonetics can subtly influence its eventual meaning, especially when it's a neologism, a newly coined word.
And for our final word in this section on transformative power, let's visit the gymnasium. When you hear that word today, you likely think of treadmills, weights, perhaps some grunting or upbeat music.
Standard gym scene.
But its origin is surprisingly revealing and involves a lot less clothing.
Indeed. Gymnasium came into English in the late 16th century via Latin from the Greek word gymnasium, and this in turn is derived from gymnasium, which literally meant Exercise naked,
Naked.
from gumnos, meaning naked.
Exercise naked. That's definitely not what most of us picture when we go to our local gym, which is the abbreviation that arose in the late 19th century, right?
Right, much later.
So how did ancient practices and the words describing them become so recontextualized and, well, domesticated in modern usage, losing their original, more literal and, frankly, startling associations?
That's a fundamental question about linguistic evolution and cultural adaptation, really. The ancient Greeks engaged in athletic training, or gymnastico, often completely unclothed.
Why?
Well, they believed in the beauty and purity of the human form, and that nudity in exercise was actually a mark of honor and devotion to physical perfection.
Hmm.
It was integral to their philosophical and athletic ideals.
Huh, different times.
Very different. Our modern gym culture, while still focused on physical fitness and health, has completely shed that literal nakedness for, well, practical, social, and moral reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The word survived, but its core visual and cultural association changed dramatically, reflecting a complete shift in societal norms around public exposure during exercise.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic illustration of how our language subtly carries echoes of vastly different historical contexts, even when we're completely unaware of them.
A fantastic illustration indeed, proving that even seemingly mundane words hold these hidden depths.
Always worth digging.
Now let's shift gears a bit. In this next part, we're focusing on words that capture movement, sound, and the very essence of human and animal actions. This section demonstrates how language often imitates or describes the physical world, creating a vivid auditory and kinesthetic vocabulary.
Yeah, it's about how our words are often born from or seek to embody the dynamic physical universe around us.
Mm.
It's a testament to how closely language is tied to our sensory experiences.
Hmm.
Many of these words are almost onomatopoeic, where they paint a precise picture of physical states that are universally understood, transcending time and culture.
Let's start with a collection of words of sound and speech. We have gab, gabble, gag in its multiple meanings, gaggle, garrulous, and glib. To begin, what's the story behind gab?
Okay, gab from the early 18th century is an informal word meaning to chat or talk idly. Pretty simple. It's actually a variant of gob, which is an old word for mouth.
Gob for mouth, like shut your gob.
Exactly. So literally, to gab is to talk from the mouth. Its derivative gabby, meaning talkative, dates from the same period and was originally Scots term. It captures that sense of unrestrained, often casual chatter.
Then we have gabble, which for me often makes me think of fast, excited, and sometimes unintelligible talk, like maybe toddlers gabbling.
Precisely. Recorded from the late 16th century, gabble comes from Dutch gabbelen. Its origin is strongly imitative, reflecting that rapid, often chaotic or unintelligible sound, much like a crowd all talking at once, or, yes, excited children.
Right.
It's also famously been used to describe the sound made by geese. Byron, for example, in his play Marino Filiero, humorously depicts this. The geese in the Capitol gabbled till Rome awoke. It's a word that truly sounds like what it describes.
It really does. And gag. This word has a couple of very distinct and almost contradictory meanings, doesn't it? One quite literal, the other more figurative.
It certainly does. There's gag, as in a mouth cover, something placed over the mouth to prevent a person from crying out or speaking. This meaning, from Middle English, is perhaps related to Old Norse gaddles, meaning with the neck thrown back, like someone struggling. Or it could simply be imitative of a choking sound.
A very physical, forceful action.
Yes. Then there's gag, as in a joke, a trick, or a witty remark, which emerged much later in the mid-19th century.
How did that meaning arise?
Well, this sense likely comes from the rather vivid notion of thrusting something down the throat of a credulous listener who would then swallow the story or trick.
Huh, like force-feeding them a joke?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Alternatively, it might also have an onomatopoeic origin stemming from an earlier sense of meaningless chatter, which then evolved into a planned piece of amusing chatter, a specific joke or bit.
And gaggle, famously used for a group of geese, or somewhat amusingly, a group of chattering people.
As a verb, gaggle goes back to Middle English and is originally imitative of the noise a goose makes, much like gable. You can find comparable words in other Germanic languages, like Dutch gaggelen and German gackern.
Huh?
What's unique and particularly successful about gaggle, though, is that it was one of the few artificial collective terms invented back in the 15th century. You know, that era produced many fanciful ones, like a murder of crows or a parliament of owls, that was actually adopted into common use.
Right. Most of those didn't really catch on in everyday speech.
Exactly. But gaggle did. Not just for geese, but, as you noted, for groups of people, too, like a gaggle of reporters or a gaggle of children. It speaks to how certain linguistic inventions just resonate and stick, while others fade away.
That's a true success story in the whimsical world of collective nouns. Next, garrulous. This sounds like it means exactly what it implies, very talkative.
It does. Garrulous, meaning excessively talkative, especially on trivial matters, dates from the early 17th century. It's quite directly based on Latin garrulus from garrere, meaning to chatter or prattle.
So very little semantic drift there.
Very little. It carries its Latin meaning almost directly into English, emphasizing that constant, often annoying stream of talk.
And finally, glib. This word often has a distinctly negative connotation today, implying superficiality or insincerity in speech, like someone's being too smooth.
That's right. Glib, from the late 16th century, had an early sense of smooth or unimpeded, often used literally to describe something physically slippery.
Ah, slippery!
Yes, it's ultimately of Germanic origin and related to the Dutch word for slippery. The contemptuous use of the word in connection with speech or writing, meaning speaking too smoothly or fluently to be convincing or sincere, developed quite early in its history.
So physical slipperiness became verbal slipperiness.
Exactly. It's fascinating how a word for physical smoothness translated to a negative judgment of verbal smoothness, suggesting that speech which is too easy or flowing might lack depth or genuine thought. It implies untrustworthiness.
What's fascinating here is the prevalence of imitative origins for so many speech-related words. It's almost as if the sound dictates the meaning, or at least heavily influences it.
It often seems that way, doesn't it?
And then you have this contrast between literal sound and figurative smoothness, or chatter, in speech, demonstrating language's incredible ability to capture the nuances and even the inherent judgments we make about human communication.
It's a remarkably expressive vocabulary for talking about talking.
Moving from sound to motion, let's explore words of movement and physicality. Our language is rich with terms that describe every conceivable kind of action, from gentle to clumsy, from aimless to precise. We'll look at gad, gallivant, gambol, gait, gallop, glide, grovel, and gyrate, starting with gad.
Okay, gad, as in gad about, meaning to move around restlessly and aimlessly, often for pleasure or gossip, is from late Middle English. It's almost certainly a back formation from the obsolete word gadling.
Gadling, what does that mean?
Gadling first meant companion, but later evolved to mean wanderer or vagabond. Its origin is Germanic. There was an alternative, less favored theory linking gad to gadflies, the idea of rushing about like an animal stung by them, but the evidence strongly supports the derivation from gadling.
So a word created by actually removing what looks like a suffix, Yorsel. That's fascinating. Can you give us a quick, simple analogy for what back formation really means?
Sure. Think of it like this. You hear the word editor, and you instinctively assume the verb must be edit because it sounds like someone doing the editing.
Right.
But actually the noun editor came first, and the verb edit was formed later by removing the or. It's when we assume a shorter word must be the root of a longer one, and then we basically create that shorter word based on the longer one.
Like beg from beggar.
Exactly. That's another classic example. In this case, gad was effectively invented from gadling by a similar process, inferring a simpler root from a more complex existing word.
That clarifies it perfectly. How about gallivant? That word always sounds like someone on a carefree adventure, maybe slightly irresponsible.
Gallivant, from the early 19th century, meaning to go around to different places for pleasure or entertainment, is perhaps a humorous alteration of the word gallant.
Gallant, as in brave or chivalrous.
Well, gallant also had senses like finely dressed and politely attentive to women, often with a touch of flirtation or showiness. So gallivanting implies a kind of playful, perhaps even flirtatious, wandering for amusement.
Oh, okay. Then gambol, a delightful, playful word for a playful jump or skip, like lambs in spring.
Precisely. From the early 16th century, gambol, meaning a playful jump or frolic, is an alteration of the obsolete gambad. This came via French from Italian gambata, meaning trip up, which is from gamba, meaning leg.
Leg.
Yes, leg. You can almost visualize the energetic leg movements implied by its root as it became associated with frolicking and playful leaps. All about the legs.
And gait, which describes a specific manner of walking or moving. Very useful for describing characters.
Gait, from late Middle English and originally Scots, is a variant of gate, which meant way or path in Middle English. Its source is Old Norse gata, related to the German Gasse, meaning alley or lane.
So your gait is literally the way you walk.
Exactly. And the spelling gate became common only in the 17th century, solidifying its distinction from the more general meaning of gait as an opening in a fence.
Gallop, the quintessential horse movement, strong and fast.
The verb gallop dates from the early 16th century, from Old French galloper. It might be that the word is a compound of an unattested Germanic word, possibly hlaupen, meaning to leap or run. It perfectly captures the powerful four-beat stride of a horse at full speed.
Glide has such a smooth, effortless, almost ethereal feel to it, like ice skating.
And its origin is just as smooth and deeply rooted. Glide is an Old English word, gliden, with a Germanic source. Interestingly, no cognates are known outside Germanic languages, making it a unique branch in the linguistic family tree, emphasizing its indigenous quality. It captures that sense of flowing effortlessly, without apparent friction.
Grovel, a word that conveys humility, often to an extreme, or even abject submission, a very strong image.
It is. Grovel, from Middle English, is another fascinating back formation. It comes from the obsolete adverb groveling, which was based on the obsolete groof, or groove, meaning the face or front.
The face.
Yes. This element was found in the Old Norse phrase on groof, meaning face downwards. So to grovel literally means to lie or crawl on one's face, often in a posture of submission or fear. It's a powerful image conveyed directly by its origin.
Wow, face downwards. That's intense. And finally, gyrate.
From the early 19th century, gyrate is based on the Greek word gyros, meaning a ring or a circle. The direct source is Latin gyrat, which is the past participial stem of gyrare, meaning to revolve. It perfectly captures circular or spiral motion, whether it's a dancer, spinning top, or a machine part.
It's remarkable how, when we group these words, it truly highlights how language captures such different forms of movement, from aimless wandering, gad, to specific manners of walking, gait, from playful jumps, gambol, to precise rotations, gyrate.
And pointing out back formations, like with gad and grovel, shows a really unique linguistic process where new words are formed by taking away what looks like a suffix from an existing word. It's almost like language editing itself, or discovering simpler forms within existing ones.
It's a less common but very interesting way that languages evolve.
To round out this section, let's look at words describing physical states and actions. These words often feel very visceral, connecting directly to fundamental human and animal experiences, capturing raw sensations and reactions. We're talking about gasp, gash, gnaw, gnarled, and gnash.
Right, these are very physical words. Starting with gasp, it immediately brings to mind a sudden, often involuntary intake of breath, typically from surprise, pain, or maybe exertion.
Yeah, a very distinct sound and action.
This word, from late Middle English, comes from Old Norse geispa, which actually meant to yawn.
To yawn. How does a yawn become a gasp? Well, the connection makes perfect sense when you think of the physical action. A wide opening of the mouth and a sudden intake of air. Both actions share that core physical movement, even if the cause and sound are different.
Ah, I see that. Okay. Then gash, which describes a deep, often ragged cut or wound.
Gash, from Middle English, had an early spelling garce. It comes from Old French garcer, meaning to chap or crack. It might even be based on Greek karasein, meaning sharpen, scratch, or engrave. The current spelling we use is from the mid-16th century. It conveys a very sharp, impactful, and often damaging action, distinct from a mere scratch.
No, that repetitive, persistent biting action. Like a dog with a bone.
Gnaw is an Old English word, noggin, of Germanic origin. It's ultimately imitative, reflecting the sound and action of chewing or biting persistently. Typically it's something hard or to wear something away. Think of a rodent gnawing on wood, or, a dog on a bone.
Gnarled, describing something twisted, rough, and knotted, often used for old tree trunks or maybe arthritic hands.
Gnarled, from the early 17th century, is a variant of gnarled, which comes from gnar, meaning knot in wood or a lump. Interestingly, gnarl itself, the verb meaning to twist into a knotty form, is another back formation, this time from the adjective gnarled, recorded from the early 19th century.
So the description came first, and then the verb for the action of becoming twisted.
Exactly. We described things as gnarled before we talked about them gnarling.
And finally, gnash, as in gnashing teeth, usually in anger or pain. A very evocative image.
Gnash, from late Middle English, may be related to Old Norse nastan, meaning a gnashing or grinding sound. It was first recorded at the end of the 15th century as a modification of an older verb, nast. It powerfully captures the sharp, often loud sound and action of grinding one's teeth together, often indicative of fury, frustration, or intense agony.
What really stands out to me here is the visceral nature of these words and their deep connection to fundamental human and animal actions and states.
Hmm.
Language can vividly describe these physical experiences, sometimes through onomatopoeia like gnaw or gnash, or by capturing a specific, often painful action like gash. It's like our ancestors were trying to perfectly capture these raw physical realities in sound and concise description, ensuring we could communicate those essential experiences.
It really grounds language in the body and in physical sensation.
Now let's move into our third part, cultural echoes and specific origins. This is where we explore words whose origins are deeply tied to specific historical events, cultural practices, literary creations, or geographical locations.
Right, this really reveals how our lexicon is a tapestry woven from incredibly diverse threads of human experience.
These are the stories that make you realize just how much history and sometimes even political intrigue is packed into our daily conversations.
This section powerfully highlights how language acts as a kind of historical record, preserving anecdotes, popular perceptions, and significant moments from the past, sometimes in surprising or even amusing ways.
We'll start with some significant historical and cultural markers. And first up, a political one that crops up every election cycle, unfortunately, gerrymander.
Ah, yes, gerrymander. From the early 19th century, it's a fascinating blend of the name of Governor Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts and the word salamander.
Salamander. Why salamander?
It arose directly from a specific political moment. It was due to the supposed similarity between a salamander and the bizarre, elongated shape of a new voting district drawn on a map in Massachusetts in 1812 when Governor Gerry was in office.
Okay.
This new district was widely felt to have been intentionally shaped or carved out to favor his Democratic-Republican Party in the upcoming election. The infamous map, with claws, wings, and fangs humorously added by critics to resemble a monster, was published in the Boston Weekly Messenger with the title, The Gerrymander.
Wow, they literally drew it as a monster named after him.
Pretty much. And the verb is now used generally for manipulating electoral districts to gain political advantage, a practice as old as elections themselves, but forever linked to this particular visual and event.
That's a vivid story. This raises an important question. How does such a specific, highly visual political event become immortalized as a general term in our language?
Well, it shows how public perception, political caricature, and a really memorable image can influence the lexicon. It took a singular incident and turned it into a universal concept for a dubious political practice.
It speaks to the power of a striking visual combined with a clear political intention.
Definitely. The image of that strangely shaped district was so potent and controversial that it just stuck. It became a shorthand for manipulative political maneuvering, showing how even a cartoonish representation can leave an indelible mark on our vocabulary, outliving the specific individuals involved.
All right, prepare for a truly delightful origin story with grog. You know, the alcoholic drink often associated with sailors, rum, and water.
That's the one. Grog from the mid-18th century has a charmingly specific origin. It is said to be from Old Grog, the reputed nickname given to Admiral Edward Vernon, who lived from 1684 to 1757.
Old grog. Why was he called that?
His nickname apparently came from his distinctive grogram cloak, a coarse, heavy fabric made of silk, mohair, and wool, giving it a somewhat rough appearance. Grogram. Grog.
Okay, so he wore a grogram cloak. How does that connect to the drink?
Well, in 1740, Admiral Vernon issued a new order that diluted rum, specifically 1 part rum to 4 parts water, should be served out to sailors instead of the traditional neat, undiluted rum. This was an attempt to curb drunkenness and maintain discipline aboard ships.
Ah, a practical measure. But here's where it gets really interesting. Imagine the sailors, perhaps a bit disgruntled by their watered-down spirits,
Probably very disgruntled.
associating this new diluted rum with the Admiral's very distinctive coarse material cloak. It's a perfect example of a personal quirk or habit becoming a widespread term, forever linking the drink to the man. It's as if they were saying, oh, we're getting old grog's drink now.
It's a prime example of metonymy in action, as you alluded to, where an attribute or an associated object becomes the name for the thing itself. The Admiral's distinctive grogram cloak became synonymous with the diluted rum he mandated. It's a testament to the power of popular nicknames and an indication of how sailors or any group with shared experiences can quickly coin and adopt new terms.
Next, guillotine. We all know what that means in its literal sense as an execution device from the French Revolution.
A grim image, certainly.
But it also has a surprising extended meaning in a completely different context.
Yes, this French word, adopted into English in the late 18th century, names the device after Joseph Ignace Guillotin, a French physician who lived from 1738 to 1814. He wasn't its inventor, we should note,
Yeah.
but he famously recommended its use for executions in 1789 during the Revolution, arguing it would be a more humane and efficient method than traditional hanging or beheading by axe.
Right, the humane execution method.
Relatively speaking, perhaps. But beyond its literal grim meaning, in the mid-19th century in the U.S., guillotine came to be used in political contexts. Specifically, it referred to a parliamentary procedure for shortening the discussion of a bill by fixing a time when the debate must end, thereby forcing a vote on the legislation without further discussion.
Like cutting off debate sharply.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? It illustrates how a word for a literal, brutal execution device could provide a powerful, if grim, metaphor for decisive, abrupt action in a completely different abstract context like political procedure. The underlying concept of quick, final termination, cutting off debate, is carried over, regardless of the severity.
It shows the human tendency to borrow powerful imagery from one domain and apply it metaphorically to another to convey intensity, finality, or even harshness.
Yes, the swift, undeniable action of the guillotine became a perfect linguistic tool to describe equally abrupt, albeit non-lethal, parliamentary maneuvers. It's a stark reminder of how language can recycle powerful images.
Let's delve into Grub Street. This one's for all the aspiring writers out there, and perhaps those who have known the struggle. It sounds, well, kind of unpleasant.
Grub Street is a phrase that refers to a class of impoverished journalists and writers, often those producing hack work or struggling to make a living through their pen, and it has a very literal origin.
A real street.
Yes, it was the name of a real street, which later changed its name to Milton Street in Moorgate, London. This was where such authors often lived in the 17th century, frequently in difficult financial circumstances, scraping by on meager earnings from their writing. It became a powerful symbol of literary poverty and drudgery.
It's incredible how a physical location can become synonymous with a social condition, connecting directly to the enduring image of the struggling artist or writer. The name itself just evokes that sense of a hardscrabble existence, of literally grubbing for a living.
It clearly illustrates how geographical locations, when strongly associated with particular social groups or activities, can enter the lexicon to describe that phenomenon. They transcend their literal street address to become an archetype. It's a potent reminder of the historical realities faced by many who pursued a life of letters.
No, guy. This is such a common informal word for a man, especially in American English, but its origin is tied to a very specific and quite infamous historical figure.
Yes, Guy. This informal word for a man or person originated in the early 19th century. It was originally recorded specifically to describe a figure representing Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes, the gunpowder plot guy.
The very same. One of the conspirators in the gunpowder plot on November 5th, 1605, this was the audacious attempt by Catholic extremists to blow up King James I and his parliament.
Right, bonfire night in the UK.
Exactly. To this day, a Guy effigy, often made of straw and old clothes, is burned traditionally each year on November 5th in commemoration of the plot, known as Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night. So the effigy was called a Guy.
What's fascinating here is how a specific historical figure, despite his intentions to overturn the government and cause mass destruction, became a generalized, informal term for any man. From an effigy of a terrorist to just a dude.
It really demonstrates language's ability to take singular historical references and broaden their scope significantly, often detaching them from their original, even infamous context, and giving them a completely new, mundane lease on life.
It speaks to the power of cultural memory and how even figures of historical notoriety can become absorbed into everyday language, their specific deeds fading in common consciousness while their name becomes a common noun.
It's a linguistic quirk that few would guess without knowing the etymology.
And then there's gypsy. This word has a long history but also contested one, tied to misconceptions about a people's origin.
Yes, gypsy from the mid-16th century was originally Gypsian, which was a shortened form of Egyptian.
Egyptian. But the Romani people aren't from Egypt, are they?
No, they aren't. This name was given because the Romani people were popularly, but incorrectly, supposed to have come from Egypt. It was a popular misconception at the time of their arrival in Europe. It's important to note the alternative spelling gypsy that has also been common.
And crucially, what do the people call themselves?
Crucially, it's vital to highlight that the name given to the people by themselves is Romani. This is also the name of their language, a rich, complex language that is a corrupted dialect of Hindi with words from various European languages woven in.
So this highlights misconceptions embedded in language and underscores the importance of understanding the true origins and self-identification of groups.
Exactly. It shows that language can sometimes perpetuate historical inaccuracies or external viewpoints rather than reflecting self-identity and genuine origins. It's a powerful lesson in how names can carry historical baggage and why using the correct self-chosen terms is important.
It serves as a stark reminder that etymology can sometimes reveal not just the origins of words, but also the historical biases, popular myths, and misunderstandings that have shaped our vocabulary and, by extension, our perceptions of different communities.
Well put.
Moving on to words from specific objects, places, or practices, these show how technical, architectural, nautical, and musical terms, or even significant cultural narratives, get woven into our broader vocabulary, often with delightful, unexpected twists. Let's start with gabardine.
Gabardine, from the early 16th century, refers to a type of garment and later a specific textile. The word comes from Old French gauverdine, and an earlier spelling was gallavardine, which perhaps stems from Middle High German Wallivart, meaning pilgrimage.
Pilgrimage, so it was clothing for pilgrims.
That seems to be the original meaning. A loose, long garment worn by a pilgrim, a type of smock made of coarse material, suitable for travel. Shakespeare even references it vividly in Merchant of Venice when Shylock says, "You call me misbeliever, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine."
Ah, okay. But now we think of gabardine as a fabric, right? Like for trench coats.
Exactly. The modern textile sense, referring to a closely woven, durable fabric of fine worsted, like that used for raincoats, is only first recorded much later, in the early 20th century. So it went from a specific pilgrim's cloak to a general fabric.
Quite a shift in practicality and common use. And gable, that familiar triangular architectural feature found on the ends of many houses.
Gable, from Middle English, comes via Old French from Old Norse gaffel, and is of Germanic origin. Related words are Dutch gaffel and German gable, both meaning fork.
Fork, like a dinner fork.
Well, yes, but think of a fork in a structural sense. This connection is key. The pointed shape of the gable was originally formed by the fork of two crossed timbers supporting the end of the roof tree in medieval construction.
Oh, so the word literally refers to the forked part of the roof where the timbers met.
Precisely. That's a wonderful visual connection. It makes so much sense now why it's called a gable.
What about gadget? That word is so ubiquitous today, referring to almost any small, clever device. Where did that come from?
Gadget, a late 19th century word, was originally primarily in nautical use. It was a general term for any small, unnamed mechanical device or part, a kind of placeholder word for something the speaker couldn't immediately name on a ship.
Like a thingamajig or whatchamacallit.
Exactly like that, but specifically nautical at first. It's probably from French gâchette, meaning a lock mechanism or trigger, or perhaps from the French dialect word gaget, meaning tool. So it started as a humble, unnamed piece of equipment on a ship and then exploded into its current broad meaning covering all sorts of tech and tools.
And garter. This one has a truly famous, perhaps even scandalous story attached to it, beyond just being an article of clothing holding up stockings.
Garter, from Middle English, is from Old French gartier, which came from garret, meaning bend of the knee or calf of the leg, probably of Celtic origin. So literally something that goes around the leg near the knee.
Makes sense. But the story, here's where it gets really interesting. The source details the Order of the Garter, the highest order of English knighthood, founded by King Edward III in the mid-14th century.
It still exists today.
Yes. Its badge is a distinctive dark blue velvet ribbon worn below the left knee, bearing the motto in gold letters, Honni soit qui mal y pense, Old French for shame on him who thinks evil of it.
A very famous motto.
And the legend behind its founding is that this very phrase was said by King Edward III himself. The story goes that he was dancing with the Countess of Salisbury when her garter slipped and fell to the floor. When some courtiers smirked or made uncharitable remarks, the king supposedly picked it up and tied it to his own leg, uttering that famous motto to shame those who harbored impure thoughts.
A fascinating, romantic, and certainly somewhat scandalous origin for a major chivalric order. Whether it's true or not, It's a great story.
It beautifully illustrates how a simple, everyday object, a garter, can become imbued with immense historical and cultural significance, becoming the central motif for an entire noble order thanks to a specific anecdote.
It speaks to the power of chivalry and courtly ideals, even if tinged with a little gossip.
Now, gas. This is one of those words you assume has always existed, a fundamental concept in chemistry, but it was actually invented by a specific person at a specific time.
You're right. The word gas was famously invented in the mid-17th century by the Belgian chemist J.B. van Helmont, who lived from 1577 to 1644.
Van Helmont, okay. Why did he invent it?
He coined it to denote an occult principle he believed to exist in all matter, an invisible, uncontainable fluid, distinct from liquids or solids. He was trying to describe something fundamental he observed in his experiments.
And how did he come up with the word gas?
He suggested it was linked to the Greek word chaos, meaning chaos. The Dutch G sound, his native language, represented the Greek K sound, as in chaos. So it was a scientific coinage with a philosophical, almost mystical underpinning, describing something formless and ethereal like chaos itself.
Chaos to gas.
Yeah.
Amazing. And finally, for this subsection, gamut. This word takes us into the world of music before it became a general term for a full range of anything.
All right, run the gamut. Gamut, from late Middle English, is from medieval Latin gamma ut. It was originally the name of the lowest note in the medieval musical scale, specifically bass G.
Gamma ut.
Yes. To understand this, you need a little medieval music theory. The Greek letter, gamma, ut, was used to represent the note G on the bass staff, and ut was the first syllable used in the system of solmization, like do-re-mi, but older, indicating the first note in the lowest of the hexachords, or six-note scales, which are the building blocks of medieval music.
Ut. Where did that come from?
The syllables for the hexachord notes, ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, came from the first syllables of each line of a Latin hymn for St. John the Baptist's day, where each line began on the next note of the scale. Ut quent laxis resonar fibrups, and so on.
Wow, that's intricate.
It is. So the gamut originally referred to the entire range of notes available in the medieval musical system, from the lowest gamma ut, bass G, to the highest note recognized at the time.
So it's not just a general range, but specifically the range of musical notes that then broaden to mean any complete range or scope, like the whole gamut of emotions.
Exactly. It's amazing how a specific musical notation system from centuries ago gave us this common word, showing the influence of specialized domains on general vocabulary.
These examples truly illustrate how technical terms, from architecture to nautical, from science to music, along with vivid cultural narratives and specific historical innovations, become integrated into our broader vocabulary, enriching our language in unexpected and delightful ways.
They're like little windows into past practices and knowledge systems.
Let's talk briefly about words of animals and collectives, how our observations of the natural world or even human characteristics and perceptions get projected onto animals, and how specialized terms can become generalized or even descriptive of human traits. First, gannet.
Gannet, an Old English word gannet, is Germanic in origin and related to the Dutch word gent, meaning gander or male goose. It refers to a large seabird known for its impressive diving abilities to catch fish.
Right, they plunge straight down.
Exactly. Interestingly, the word is sometimes used figuratively to describe a greedy person. This slang application first appeared in the 1920s, often specifically for a greedy sailor. The bird's rapid plunging dive and seemingly voracious appetite for fish perhaps led to this figurative, slightly derogatory human application, like someone greedily grabbing food.
Makes sense. And speaking of collective nouns, we mentioned gaggle earlier, but it's worth revisiting for its exceptional success compared to other such terms.
Yes, gaggle, as a verb, is Middle English, originally imitative of the noise a goose makes. While many artificial collective terms for groups of animals or people were invented in the 15th century, many of which remain quite obscure or humorous, gaggle was one of the very few that was actually adopted widely into common use.
It just sounds right, doesn't it?
It does. It stands out because most such attempts at creating new, clever collective nouns simply don't stick.
Oh.
Gaggle did, not only for geese, but also for groups of chattering people, demonstrating its phonetic and semantic appeal.
And lastly, gorilla. This majestic ape, now a symbol of strength and conservation, got its name from a very surprising and ancient source.
Gorilla, from the mid-19th century, comes from an alleged African word for wild or hairy person. This term was found in a Greek account of the voyage of the Carthaginian explorer Hanno, dating all the way back to the 5th or 6th century BC.
6th century BC. Wow.
Yes, Hanno reportedly encountered a tribe of what he described as hairy women, whom his interpreters called gorillae. This ancient, possibly misidentified description of a hairy person or wild tribe was then adopted in 1847 by Western naturalists as the specific scientific name of the ape after its modern scientific discovery and classification.
That's fascinating. How an ancient, possibly misidentified description of what might have been a human tribe became the name for an entire species of ape thousands of years later.
It powerfully highlights how human characteristics or perceptions are sometimes projected onto animals, and how specialized terms can become generalized or even descriptive of human traits based on physical resemblances, even if the initial identification was ambiguous or mistaken.
We've taken quite a journey through the G words, exploring dramatic shifts in meaning, uncovering words deeply tied to specific historical events, and marveling at the onomatopoeic power of language. Now, for our final part, we'll dive into the deep roots of abstract concepts.
Okay.
This is where we explore words that underpin our understanding of human qualities, fundamental aspects of existence, and abstract ideas, often tracing their origins back to ancient Latin and Greek roots.
Right. This reveals how language shapes our philosophical and emotional landscape, giving form to our deepest thoughts and beliefs. This final section truly brings home how our abstract thinking is often built upon very concrete, ancient linguistic foundations, showing the enduring legacy of classical languages on our modern thought.
Let's begin with concepts of being and character. We have a strong connection through gender, genuine, and a whole family of words rooted in Latin genius or genus, like generosity, genial, genie, and genius itself. First, gender.
Gender, from late Middle English, is from Old French genre, which is now the word genre, in modern French. And this in turn is based on Latin genus, meaning birth, family, nation, or kind.
Kind or type.
Exactly. Its early use in English was primarily as a grammatical term, meaning a type or class of noun, like masculine, feminine, neuter, which directly reflected this sense of Latin genus in categorization.
But now it means something quite different in social terms.
Yes, what's fascinating here is the distinction the word itself draws today. While sex tends to refer more to biological differences, gender refers to social or cultural differences, roles, and identities. This usage reflects ongoing societal discussions and our evolving understanding of human identity, demonstrating how words adapt to new social constructs and ways of thinking.
So it started as a grammatical category and evolved into a profound social one, reflecting shifts in how we define identity. Then there's genuine. This word describes something authentic, real, or sincere.
Genuine, from the late 16th century, originally held meanings like natural, inherent, and proper. It comes from Latin genuinus, which remarkably stems from genu, meaning knee.
The knee. What does the knee have to do with being genuine?
This refers to the ancient Roman custom of a father acknowledging paternity of a newborn child by placing it on his knee. It was a very physical, undeniable act of acceptance and acknowledgement of the child as his own, as truly belonging.
Wow, that's a beautiful, almost intimate origin story for genuine, linking authenticity to a father's literal embrace of his child.
It is. Later, it became more broadly associated with genus, meaning birth or race, implying something innate or truly belonging to its kind. The sense, not counterfeit, dates from the mid-17th century, and its use to describe people as free from affectation, meaning sincere and authentic, is recorded from the late 19th century.
Now, as you mentioned, the Latin root genius, or genus, gives us a whole family of words that explore different facets of innate quality and spirit. Generosity, genial, genie, and genius. Let's break those down. How about generosity?
Certainly. Generosity, from late Middle English, initially denoted nobility of birth or high-mindedness, coming from Latin generositas. The original Latin sense of generosus was of noble birth.
So being generous meant being noble.
Essentially, yes. The idea was that nobility implied certain characteristics, like being courageous, magnanimous, and open-handed. The current senses involving kindness, magnanimity, and a willingness to give freely date from the 17th century, extending from that core idea of noble character.
So generosity literally meant noble character first, and the giving aspect was a later extension. And genial, that sounds friendly.
Genial, from the mid-16th century, is from Latin genialis, which meant nuptial or productive, stemming from genius in the sense of a generative spirit, associated with birth and festivity. The Latin sense of fostering life and growth was adopted into English, leading to the sense mild and conducive to growth, or pleasant, like a genial climate in the mid-17th century.
Ah, right.
This then developed into its more common modern meaning, cheerful, kindly, and jovial, by the mid-18th century, referring to a disposition that fosters warmth and comfort like a genial host.
And genie, that magical spirit from a lamp conjured in fantastical tales. Like Aladdin's genie.
Genie, in its early English use in the mid-17th century, referred to a guardian or protective spirit, directly coming from French genie, which in turn is from Latin genius, so it originally meant something closer to a guardian angel or guiding spirit.
How did it become the wish granter in the lamp?
Genie was adopted in its current sense by 18th century French translators of the Arabian Nights entertainments. They chose it because of its phonetic resemblance and thematic sense to the Arabic word jinni, or jinn, which refers to a supernatural being in Arabian folklore. It's a wonderful example of cross-cultural linguistic exchange and how a word can be repurposed to fit a new, fantastical narrative.
That's a fascinating linguistic and literary fusion. And finally, genius itself, referring to exceptional intellectual or creative power.
Genius, from late Middle English, is a direct use of a Latin word. The original Latin genius meant an attendant spirit present from one's birth, and, by extension, innate ability or inclination. It comes from the root of genere, meaning to beget or give birth to.
So like the spirit you're born with.
Exactly. The original English sense was a tutelary spirit attendant on someone throughout their life, believed to guide their destiny. This gave rise in the late 16th century to the notion of a person's characteristic disposition or temperament, which then led to the sense of a person's natural ability. Finally, the word acquired its most common modern meaning, exceptional natural ability or intellect, recorded from the mid-17th century.
It's amazing how these words, sharing a common Latin root related to birth or an attendant spirit, branched out to define different aspects of innate quality, disposition, and even supernatural influence.
It really reflects evolving philosophical and social concepts of human potential and character, emphasizing what we are born with or what attends us from birth, whether physical, dispositional, or spiritual.
Now let's explore concepts of measure and truth. These words define how we evaluate, deny, and understand the core of something, whether it's a physical quantity or an abstract argument. We'll look at gain, gainsay, gist, and then a whole group related to grace, grateful, and gratis, and finally, gravity and guilt. Starting with gain.
Gain, in its early use from the late 15th century, was a noun from Old French gagne, meaning booty or profit, something acquired, often through effort or conquest. The verb is from Old French gagner, and its ultimate origin is Germanic.
So something you get.
Right. The phrase gain ground, meaning to make progress or to advance, was originally a military term referring literally to taking terrain from an adversary. And of course, the popular modern expression, no gain without pain, became frequent from the 1990s, expressing the enduring idea that success or advantage requires effort and sacrifice.
And then gainsay, which is less common in everyday speech today, but still powerful in formal contexts. Sounds a bit archaic.
It does sound a bit literary now.
Mm.
Gainsay, from Middle English, is a wonderfully transparent word in its construction. It's from the obsolete prefix gain, which meant against, and the verb say.
Ah, against to say.
Exactly. So literally to speak against or to contradict. In current use, it is largely a literary word, meaning to deny or contradict something that has been said or asserted. It's quite straightforward in its etymology.
Gist, meaning the main point, the essence of something, like get the gist.
Gist, from the early 18th century, has a fascinating legal origin. It comes from Old French, specifically from the third-person singular present tense of gesser, meaning to lie, which itself comes from Latin jacere.
To lie, as in telling lies.
No, as in to lie down or to rest upon. In Anglo-French legal phrases, cest action gist meant this action lies, implying that there were sufficient legal grounds to proceed with a case. The case rested on these grounds.
I see.
From this, gist was adopted into legal English to denote the grounds themselves, the real point or basis of an action. More general use of the word began in the early 19th century, broadened to mean the essential point of any matter. So the gist is literally where the argument or matter lies or rests.
That's a great example of legal jargon entering common parlance and becoming universally understood. Next, a family of words all stemming from the Latin gratis, meaning pleasing or thankful, grace, grateful, gratis, gratitude, gratuitous, and gratuity. Let's start with grace. So many meanings for this one.
Oh yes, grace, from Middle English, came via Old French from Latin gratia, meaning pleasing quality, favor, or gratitude. The word has had a remarkably diverse semantic journey. It once conveyed the sense of attitude or way of proceeding, still reflected in phrases like airs and graces.
Hmm.
Other semantic strands include gracefulness in movement or form, favor or benevolence, as in divine grace or receiving a grace period, and thanks, illustrated in say grace before a meal.
And the source mentioned an interesting substitution use.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. Grace has also been used since the mid-18th century as a substitute for God in exclamations such as, "Oh gracious," or "Good gracious," showcasing a blend of reverence and perhaps mild exasperation.
That's a delightful, almost subtle substitution, and it shows the flexibility of language even in exclamations. And gratis is fairly straightforward, right? Meaning free.
Gratis, from late Middle English, is a Latin word, originally a contraction of gratis, meaning as a kindness or out of favor. So, to say something is gratis means it's given freely without charge as a gesture of goodwill.
And how about gratitude and gratuitous? They feel related from gratis, but gratuitous often has a negative twist today, like gratuitous violence.
That's right. Gratitude, from late Middle English, came into English from Old French or medieval Latin gratitudo, directly from Latin gratis. It simply conveys the state of being thankful or appreciative.
Okay.
Gratuitous, from the mid-17th century, comes from Latin gratuitous, meaning given freely or spontaneous, plus the suffix -ifus. While its original sense was simply freely given or done without obligation, it evolved to carry the negative connotation of being uncalled for or unnecessary, especially when something is added without good reason.
So freely given became excessive and unwarranted.
Exactly. It's an interesting semantic turn where the lack of necessity shifted from neutral to negative.
And gratuity, like a tip.
Gratuity, in early examples from the late 15th century, denoted graciousness or favor. The source is Old French gratuité, or medieval Latin gratuitas, meaning gift. Today, of course, it most commonly refers to a sum of money given to a person for service rendered, essentially a gift for good service, which became customary a tip.
So we see how a core concept of favor or pleasure ramifies into ideas of thanks, something freely given, a polite gesture, and even an excessive act.
It highlights the various ways we express appreciation, obligation, and even disapproval within a shared linguistic root.
Now let's talk about gravity and grave, meaning serious, two words that share a profound connection to weight and importance.
Both come from the Latin gravis, meaning heavy or serious. Gravity first entered English in the late 15th century, directly from Old French or Latin gravitas, meaning weight or seriousness, in a moral or intellectual sense, like the gravity of the situation.
Right, and the physics term came later.
Yes, the scientific term in physics, referring to the force of attraction that draws objects toward the center of the Earth, dates from the 17th century, building on that literal sense of weight. Grave, meaning severe or serious, as in a grave wound or grave consequences, dates from the late 15th century, also from Old French grave or Latin gravis.
So the literal heaviness of an object informed the abstract seriousness or importance of a situation.
Showing a clear conceptual link between the physical and the abstract.
And finally, guilt and guilty. These words speak to fundamental concepts of wrongdoing and moral responsibility.
The origin of Old English guilt, meaning failure of duty or fault, is quite distinct. The source says no equivalent forms are known in other Germanic languages, making it a unique English development. Legal use of the term is recorded early, referring to legal responsibility for an offense.
And the phrase guilt by association.
That's much more recent, dating from the 1940s, referring to the idea that one is culpable simply for being connected to wrongdoers. Guilty was spelled guiltig in Old English. Its association with conscience and feelings of moral culpability or remorse dates from the late 16th century, famously captured in Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 3. Suspicion always haunts a guilty mind.
So it moved beyond a purely legal failing to an internal psychological state.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these words highlight how deeply ingrained moral, legal, and physical concepts are in our language. Our understanding of abstract ideas often comes from concrete, physical origins like heaviness for gravity or fault for guilt, which then extend to abstract realms of thought and emotion.
It's a profound connection between the tangible and the conceptual, showing how language grounds our most complex thoughts and fundamental experiences.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what an incredible journey we've taken through the G words. We've uncovered surprising transformations, delved into vivid historical anecdotes, and gained profound cultural insights.
We really have.
It's clear that even the most common words we use every single day hold layers of history, offering endless opportunities for discovery.
From glamour, evolving from occult scholarship, to Hollywood sparkle, to geek, transforming from a carnival act to an esteemed enthusiast, and gossip, changing from a sacred bond to idle chatter. These words are true linguistic fossils.
Hmm.
They reveal the ever-shifting landscape of human culture and perception. They show us that language is not just a tool for communication, but a dynamic, living record of our collective past.
This deep dive was tailored just for you, designed to provide a shortcut to being well-informed and to equip you with fascinating aha moments and unexpected linguistic connections to share.
Hopefully.
You now know some truly wild backstories to everyday terms, stories that can spark curiosity and connect you more deeply to the words you speak.
And as we conclude this deep dive, maybe consider this. If glamour once meant scholarship and geek referred to a carnival act,
Oh.
what surprising transformations are our words undergoing right now, today, shaping how future generations will understand our current world?
That's a great question.
Which G words, or any words for that matter, will carry completely new, perhaps even unrecognizable meanings tomorrow? And what will that tell us about the journey of language itself in our rapidly changing society?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the G words. We hope you enjoyed the journey as much as we did.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration into the hidden stories of our language.